Babe Ruth's career is one of the best known in baseball. Decades after his home run records were broken, many fans still remember the numbers 714 and 60. This is a testament to Ruth's greatness and enduring appeal. But what happened when Father Time caught up with him and he began his inevitable decline? What went on in his last years with the Yankees and his desire to manage a team? Let's find out. We're all familiar with how his career began. He was a legendary pitcher with the Boston Red Sox who had discovered his home run stroke. He also led the team to 3 World Series championships. But when the Red Sox sold his contract to the Yankees, Ruth took New York and baseball to a stratospheric level of popularity. From 1926 to 1931, Babe Ruth was baseball's top player, leading the league in WAR in each of those years. He probably would have won MVP awards during that time, except that for much of that period, former winners were disqualified from winning again. When Yankees manager Miller Huggins died at the end of the 1929 season, Ruth broached the idea of being a player manager. Despite the difficulty of finding Huggins' replacement, the Yankees did not offer the job to Ruth. Instead, they gave it to Bob Shockey. After just one season, the Yankees fired Shockey and hired Joe McCarthy. Fortunately for the Yankees, but unfortunately for Ruth, McCarthy was one of the greatest baseball managers ever. His success meant that Ruth had little chance ever to manage the team, but Ruth was confident that he could eventually be a manager or player manager. After all, some of the greatest players of that time, such as Ty Cobb and Rogers Hornsby, were player managers. Besides, he was arguably baseball's biggest star, and he thought that surely a team would give him an opportunity. Babe Ruth continued to play well and had his last great season in 1932. He hit .341 with 41 home runs and 137 RBIs. He finished third in WAR behind Jimmy Fox and Lefty Grove of the Athletics. Ruth also finished sixth in MVP voting behind Fox and teammates Lou Gehrig and Lefty Gomez. During this season, there were rumors he would return to the Red Sox as the team's next manager, but it didn't happen. In 1933, he remained with the Yankees. Babe Ruth's stats declined, but he was still an above-average player and once more led the league in walks. Ruth hit .301 with 34 home runs and 104 RBIs. He was also a starter in the first-ever baseball All-Star game. By 1934, he knew his playing days were ending. The Yankees offered him the role of manager of the Newark Bears, the team's top minor league team. But Ruth declined, supposedly because his wife and business manager advised against it. The Detroit Tigers also considered him as player manager, but instead of meeting the owner immediately, he went to Hawaii and asked him to wait. But Frank Navin, owner of the Tigers, didn't want to wait and instead gave the role to Mickey Cochran. That season, at age 39, Ruth was named an All-Star, but he was clearly in decline compared to his typical stats. He batted .288 with 22 home runs and 84 RBIs. It was decent but disappointing for a player like Ruth. At the end of the 1934 season, the Yankees released Babe Ruth. Like in the cases of all elite athletes, Father Time eventually caught up with him, but the Babe didn't waste any time. Just a day after the Yankees released him, he signed a 3-year deal with the National League's Boston Braves to be their assistant manager, vice president, and star player. It was a sort of homecoming for him as he began his major league career with the Boston Red Sox. There was much speculation that Ruth would soon manage the Braves. While Ruth's main job was to play, the deal was framed as if he would eventually step into a managerial or ownership role, which appealed to Ruth's long-standing ambition to manage a team. But it wasn't meant to be. Soon Ruth realized that his non-playing positions meant little. The incumbent manager ignored his advice on running the team. As vice president, he was supposed to have a say in all club transactions. Instead, he was limited to public appearances and signing tickets. He also didn't get a share in the team's profits as discussed. Worse, as he clashed with the front office, his performance as a hitter fell off a cliff. He was 40 years old and was struggling to even make contact in the plate. But the Babe wasn't done yet. On May 25, 1935, he hit 3 home runs off the Pittsburgh Pirates. The third one was the first ever hit out of Forbes Field. The Braves lost 11-7, but the biggest winner that day was Ruth. People urged him to retire that day and end his career on a high note, but he declined and played several more games. Still, just 8 days later, he finally retired. Ruth hit just 181 with 6 home runs and 12 RBIs with the Braves. The team gave him an unconditional release, meaning he could sign with anyone. But there were no offers. The 1935 Braves finished 38 and 125 with a winning percentage of .248, the worst in modern National League history. Thus, Ruth had the distinction of being part of one of the greatest teams ever, the 1927 Yankees, and one of the worst, the 1935 Braves. But once more, the baseball world honored him. Just 8 months after his retirement, he was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame as part of its inaugural class. 5 men were elected: Ty Cobb, Ruth, Honus Wagner, Christy Mathewson, and Walter Johnson. Yet Ruth was the only one to never get an offer to be a manager. But why? Let's focus on the one player who could compete with Ruth in terms of prestige in those days: Ty Cobb. Cobb was an aggressive competitor and played mind games with his opponents. And despite being much less likable than Ruth, Cobb got the most votes in the Hall of Fame selection. Ruth finished second, tied with Honus Wagner. But why was Cobb given the opportunity to manage while Ruth was not? There were several reasons, much of them based on each player's reputation. First, Cobb was known for being deeply invested in the strategies and finer details of the game. This intellectual side of Cobb made owners see him as someone who could transition into a leadership role. Conversely, Ruth was celebrated as a power hitter who revolutionized the game with his home runs. But he was not seen as a strategic player in the same way as Cobb. Second, Cobb maintained a disciplined, regimented personal lifestyle. Owners believed this discipline would translate to an ability to manage and maintain order within a team. Ruth, by contrast, had a well-known reputation for his love of partying, drinking, and womanizing, which worried baseball executives. Third, Cobb was known for pushing his teammates hard and for taking an intense, hands-on approach to team dynamics, even if it made him unpopular with some players. His emphasis on effort, hustle, and discipline resonated with the expectations of a manager who would put team success over individual glory. Ruth, while beloved by teammates, was more of a solo star. Ultimately, Ty Cobb's image as a disciplined, strategic thinker and student of the game made him more appealing as a managerial candidate than Ruth. It seemed that the owners had an exalted opinion of Ruth as a player, but not so much as a leader. But heartbreak didn't just come from Ruth's quest to be a baseball manager. He also sought a job as a baseball announcer on radio, which was the most popular medium at the time. Given his celebrity, Ruth would likely attract listeners, but he didn't get offers. This is in contrast to a great, though less popular player like pitcher Dizzy Dean of the Cardinals. While Ruth was incredibly knowledgeable about baseball, radio required specific skills that he hadn't shown before. His speaking voice, tone, and cadence didn't have the smoothness or clarity associated with broadcasting personalities, and he sometimes struggled to express himself fluently in a way that would captivate listeners. This was in contrast with Dizzy Dean, who joined radio broadcasting in 1941. Dean was known for his folksy, humorous, and plain-spoken style that audiences found both entertaining and relatable. While he wasn't formally trained in broadcasting or known for eloquence, his southern drawl and casual way of speaking endeared him to listeners. His speech wasn't polished by professional standards, but his authenticity and personality made him a natural fit for the airwaves. Additionally, Ruth was used to being celebrated as a player and hero, which made it harder for him to adapt to a support role on the air, where his primary job would have been to shine the spotlight on the players and the action on the field rather than on himself. It is possible, of course, that Ruth could have adapted to the needs of the job, but no one gave him a chance. According to Ruth's daughter, Julie Ruth Stevens, these rejections left the Babe hurt and in a severe depression. Despite these setbacks, Ruth maintained a public presence. He continued to play golf and drew crowds wherever he went. In 1942, he appeared as himself in the Lou Gehrig tribute and biofilm, Pride of the Yankees. To prepare for the role, Ruth shed weight from 270 to 223 pounds. When World War II began, Ruth shared his star power in the fundraising efforts. It was during this time that doctors advised Ruth to take better care of himself. He tried, hoping to reverse years of abuse, But in 1946, Ruth experienced pain in his eye and had difficulty swallowing. He was soon diagnosed with cancer, though his family withheld the information from him. He took part in experimental variations of chemotherapy, which briefly improved his health. But his body was failing him, and he slowly deteriorated. On June 13, Ruth visited Yankee Stadium for the last time in his life, appearing at the 25th anniversary celebrations of the house that Ruth built. Sadly, just over 2 months later, Babe Ruth died on August 16, 1948. He was 53. Today, Ruth remains baseball's greatest legend. Thank you for watching. Why do you think Babe Ruth never became a baseball manager? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing to see more baseball content.